the ideology of progress means that what is handed down to us by tradition is, by definition, suspect and probably wrong. And if you apply that, as you say, if you apply that to what has happened to this country, in this country, to public morality and private morality over the past 50 or 60 years, you can see how this accounts for much of the damaging change that we have undergone.
Robin Aitken, just such a joy always to talk to you, and a big fan of yours and your friendship with the C4M community goes back many years. And great that you can join us again. For those who haven't heard you or seen you before, they're going to get a real treat. But would you just like to say hello to our viewers and our listeners?
Of course, Tony, it's great to be back with you again. I always enjoy these discussions we have.
Actually, you're former BBC journalist, Today programme, no less. And for about 20 years, you've been talking about ideological possession at the BBC, all sorts of things like that. And you've been written off as somebody who's just disgruntled and fussy and making a noise in the background. But it turns out, actually, that in the last week or two, one of the BBC's most prominent heads of news, Fran Unsworth, has also been quoted as saying she was driven out by the ideological bias at the BBC and by the bullying that was associated with that, etc., etc. So are we saying that you were vindicated?
In a way, yes. You're quite right. I knew Fran a little bit when we were both much younger. And so when I saw her comments, it just confirmed me in my view that the BBC has been the victim of ideological capture. I knew that when I worked there. And I think actually, since I started writing about it, a lot of people have come around to my point of view. I don't think that, I'm not claiming responsibility for that myself. I can't claim the credit for that myself entirely. But in my defense, I would say that I did blow the whistle early on this, because it was just clear to me when I worked there that that the BBC has a mind of its own. It has a worldview, and that worldview is aligned in a certain political direction. And I don't think that any honest person who works in the BBC could deny that. And Fran Unsworth coming out and saying what she did, I think will just cause more people actually to rethink their idea of the BBC. I still meet people, as you probably do, who think the BBC, is a truth-telling organisation, and they take what it says very seriously. But I think there's an increasing number of us who don't, and who see the flaws and the real contradictions in the BBC's reporting.
Yeah, your book, The Noble Liar. If anybody hasn't read that, Robin, let me just recommend that they do go and get that as soon as you can and read it, because it's salient to what's happening today, even though it was written a few years ago now. It's very salient and very descriptive of the BBC, as it still is. But the point you make in that book is that essentially it's not like they believe what they're saying. They believe that their version of the truth. And again, I think maybe we need to separate the corporate BBC, the editorial staff and the senior managers, maybe from the jobbing BBC, the day-to-day individuals, of course. Maybe not, I don't know. But that they believe what they're saying and that there is only one version of the truth and that it's theirs. Do you still maintain that?
I do. And what I think underlies that is a belief among a lot of BBC people that in some way their stance on issues like the trans issue are kind and generous and benevolent. That's the problem. The BBC has a tendency always to see itself on the side of the angels. They find it very difficult to it's not a very self-critical organization in that way. And the weight of opinion in the BBC has coalesced around certain takes on contentious issues like trans. And I find it easy to understand, I'm sure you do too, actually, that nobody wants to be unkind to trans people. That's a given. And there are very few of us who would wish to see trans people persecuted or prosecuted in any way. That's not what the game is. The point is, if you stand on the point of trans rights as being non-negotiable, then, as has become evident now because of the Supreme Court ruling, that tramples on other people's rights. And in this case, it's the rights of women to enjoy a degree of privacy in certain spaces. Now, it was always obvious to anybody whose critical faculties were not blunted by an overlay of, we can call it woke consciousness. This idea that you have to be nicey about everything. Yes, we all have to be charitable. Yes, we have to be kind. But that shouldn't blind us to the reality of things. And, biology really is a non-negotiable. It's, you didn't need to be a Nobel Prize winning biologist to understand that men and women are as we are, and that trying to blur that line. Now, what was fascinating to me listening to Fran Unsworth and reading what she has had to say on this was the way in which she found herself up against, clearly, in the, as you put it, these are the guys in the trenches, the ordinary working journalists in the BBC. There was a body of them who believed firmly and in trans rights in the most absolute form. And she was unable, this I don't quite get. I don't quite get why she didn't just say to them, listen, folks, I understand that you're well-meaning, but actually this is not something that the BBC can do. In the commentary and the writing which surrounds this latest incident with Fran Unsworth, there was this, someone had picked out an email which had come from a senior boss, which had suggested that on this issue, the BBC's rules about impartiality, the rules about presenting both sides of any contentious issue, should be in some way sidelined. That actually this was an issue where the right and wrong, if you will, was so obvious that the BBC could jettison its obligation to be impartial. That's seriously worrying because, they've already done this actually on other issues like climate change, so we shouldn't be surprised by that. But the idea that senior bosses within the BBC do not understand what the commitment to impartiality means is very worrying indeed. And I hope that the new Director General is aware of this problem and will reaffirm what BBC impartiality should be.
Yeah. And I don't want to go down a rabbit hole, but of course it's wider than just the trans issue. You mentioned woke, and it's generally a political bias with a small p leaning in one specific direction. And of course we had the example back, I think it was November, wasn't it, last year, where actually a factual program was found to have intentionally misled the public in its reporting around Trump. And that resulted in the resignation of a Director General, senior news staff, etc., etc. But it wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an accident. It was like, well, we're going to do this, and you think, well, that's not just not presenting a balanced view. It's intentionally presenting a wrong view, and it makes you think, well, in what other areas have they been doing that and just not been caught out?
Yeah, well, you put your finger on it, and the issue which first really ignited my indignation about this was when it was years ago, back in the 80s, when I was at the BBC, still working my way as a reporter through the ranks. And I became incensed about the one-sidedness of the way that BBC presented debates on abortion.
Yep.
Abortion seems to me to be a moral question of the utmost seriousness, because as I see it, we were all fetuses once, and we might all have been aborted. That's the point to bear in mind, that when you abort a baby, you are aborting, potentially, you and me. But the BBC has been in the pocket of the so-called pro-choice side of that argument for nigh on 50 years. And it was that issue really which really irked me, really angered me. I remember I happened to get into a lift in the BBC one day with Jenny Murray. Oh. Jenny Murray was at that time, she was on Woman's Hour. I'd heard a discussion on Woman's Hour, maybe the previous day, I can't remember, it's many years ago this happened. And she and I were in this lift, and I said to her, what about that debate yesterday? I said, that wasn't, she got really angry. I mean, she was really furious that I should have taken issue with her and with her program. And she simply saw my point of view as being an illegitimate point of view. I had no right to that point of view, and certainly the BBC, in her view, would have been wrong, I think, to have put that point of view forward.
Interesting.
And that tells you an awful lot about this is, abortion has become one of the sort of keystone foundation stones of the BBC's worldview. And they are constantly promoting the idea that wider access to abortion is a solution to a problem. I don't get it.
And it's interesting because it goes, so our beef would be exactly the same around marriage and motherhood and all sorts of things like that. They can never say anything good about it. It's always, the difficulties I've had being a mother and how I regret having my children. I did an analysis recently on articles around motherhood, and it's like they just haven't written anything positive ever, which I could find. But there's lots of the alternatives. So how do we... Is it fixable? I mean, one of my conjectures around this is when you look at temperaments and when you look at artistic people generally are very open-minded. They have a high degree of trait openness, as the psychologists, the sociologists would call it, trait openness. So they're open to new ideas, and they don't like borders around thought. They don't like borders around sexuality. They don't like borders around countries. They don't like borders. Yep, it's quite, and that happens. It's associated with an artistic tendency because you think beyond the box. You create something that wasn't there before because your mindset isn't stuck in what's around you. In an artistic organisation such as the BBC, which attracts lots of, how is that ever going to be fixable?
Well, that's a very good question. I'm currently, amongst other things, I'm currently writing a book which is looking at the idea of progress and the way that progress has become an ideology, which I think is very damaging. And one of the insights which the work I've done so far on this is this, that if you think of yourself as progressive, what that has come to mean is that change is always good. So the ideology of progress means that what is handed down to us by tradition is, by definition, suspect and probably wrong. And if you apply that, as you say, if you apply that to what has happened to this country, in this country, to public morality and private morality over the past 50 or 60 years, you can see how this accounts for much of the damaging change that we have undergone. So if you take marriage, for instance, the fact that men and women in society is across the known range of human existence, men and women have always got married. Now, there have been polygamous marriages, there have been all sorts of different kinds of marriage, but in our culture, in Western European culture, marriage became recognized as the best way to raise children.
Yep.
And I think that there's a very good reason for that, because I think that the complementarity of males and females mean that if you have mum and dad and children, they get a proper diverse input, if you like, from the male and female side of the equation. You have a father, and fathers have a particular role, and you have a mother, and she has a different but complementary role. You need both those roles, ideally, to raise children. Now, progressives have undermined that view, and they've done it deliberately, and they've done it step by step over many decades now. What they have said is, forget all this stuff about marriage. Marriage is just, a tradition, a cultural tradition, and actually we can all just get on perfectly well without it. We can have blended families, we can have people can get married if they want, sure, that's okay, but you don't have to get married. And if you don't get married, you'll be perfectly adequate as a parent and your family won't suffer. This is the kind of thinking. It's not true. It is not true. The progressive fallacy when it comes to the question of marriage is obvious and stark, and it's proven time and time again by research from sociologists and people who are interested in these matters. The academic research proves that a stable male-female married couple is the best way to raise children. Now, what is true of marriage is also true of other areas of the culture. This idea that in the name of free speech, we can swamp the culture with pornography is another clearly absurd, wrong, evil, and damaging idea. I mean, it can do no good at all. Pornography does no good to anybody.
Well, we wonder why 14-year-old boys are going around raping girls, and you think, well, if all we're going to teach them in school is sex, and more sex, and all different ways of having sex, and watch this and watch that, and pornography isn't bad as long as it's not choking or as long as there's permission given, what do you expect is going to happen?
Exactly. I mean, and this has all been done in the name of progress. That those people who call themselves progressive line up on these issues absolutely instinctively, as they have lined up. They line up on the trans issue, they line up on divorce, they line up on abortion. You can say, with 99% certainty, that somebody who presents themselves as a politician on the so-called progressive side of politics will believe all these things. And I don't think I don't think the battle is lost on these things, because, I was heartened by the outcome of the assisted dying bill, because that was another issue where progressive opinion has been on the side of killing yet again. What's the solution to this? Oh, well, we'll kill them.
Yes.
Yeah. It's like, abortion, kill them. Old people, kill them, whatever. It's such a sort of damaging and evil response to human predicaments. But actually, as we saw in Parliament, in fact, it was close in the Commons, much closer than I thought it would be, given the huge number of Labour MPs and Lib Dem MPs that are out there. But, the line has just been held. just. And now is the chance to, when that question is reawakened, as it certainly will be, we can fight that battle again. I think, Tony, I mean, I am an optimist by nature, but I do think that if we could once get these matters properly debated, but we're back now to the BBC, that the BBC holds the ring in so many of these issues. If we could get a proper debate about marriage, for instance, or a proper debate about abortion, if we could get the BBC properly to engage with these big issues and be fair-minded about them, maybe the tide of public opinion could be turned. At the moment, as the BBC is constituted, it can't be, because the BBC has been captured by progressive opinion.
Well, I mean, there we are. What more can we say? It's a slightly depressing conclusion, but it's that's where we are, maybe.
It is, but it's not. The thing is, I always think that for believing Christians, as I am, I think that the truth of these matters is not only is it in plain sight, I think that it appeals to people when it's explained to them right from wrong in these matters. I believe these arguments can be won. So I'm not saying it'll happen in my lifetime necessarily or in yours, but I do think that that we are not forever condemned to a world where these obvious evils and these obviously wrong and poisonous doctrines are forever in the ascendant.
I think you're right. Yeah, I think you're right.
I hope so.
And if you look at the evidence, you look at the pro-life movements among young people in the US. It's changed over the last 20 years or so. So now the majority of young people are supporting the idea of pro-life.
Yes.
And you look at, well, why is that the case? It's quite simple. Pro-lifers have more kids. And you're more likely to adopt the political views of your parents who you grew up with. And in the same way, the only people having kids at the moment turn out to be religious folk who, perhaps will feel a certain way about some of these things. And so it might correct itself in time. They shall inherit the earth. But the problem is, of course, how much damage will be done in the meantime to generations, absolutely. Really. And this it almost is a cosmos versus chaos battle, order versus burn it all down.
Yes. This country, our country, this culture has been led into a position now where these matters are blurred in the public mind. So people think, for instance, on the abortion issue, people say, oh, well, it's legal, therefore it's right. No, you can have bad laws, you can have evil laws, and we do. But the point about laws is they can be changed, but it's going to be a mighty battle to do so.
Yeah, and there's nothing new under the sun. All the way back to, you refer to being a Christian, the Garden of Eden, and the devil himself saying, surely God didn't say, all the way, right the way, and it's exactly the same now. Surely that's not the definition of good, this is, crazy stuff. But I think we'll get there, and it is exciting. And I'm so glad that you've been a trailblazer, Robin Aitken. It's brilliant. And I'm glad that as the days go on, so does your vindication in that. If anybody hasn't had your book, I would ask them to go and get it. The Noble Liar, available at all good bookstores. Robin Aitken, it's a privilege to talk to you again.
Thanks a lot, Tony. Great to talk to you.